The Ladder of Divine Ascent, Step 25. On superb humility, the ruiner of the passions, which is grounded in spiritual feeling. The one who supposes it is possible to use mere words to explain the emotion from and the result of the love of the Lord precisely, with words such as blessed humbleness, elegantly, holy innocence, sincerely, godly enlightenment, true fear of God, steadfastness of the honest heart, and supposes that by his account of things of this type he will enlighten those who have not had the experience of them, is like a person who with words and analogies would like to give the concept of the sweetness of honey to others who have never tried it. Just as the latter speaks without effect, not to say babbles, so the first either gives the sense of having no experience of what he is relating, or he has become only a tool of vainglory. This topic sets a prize in front of us as a standard, maintained in earthen vessels, which are our bodies, and the quality of it defies all description. This prize has an engraving which cannot be understood because it comes from the heavens, and those that attempt to describe it with words only supply themselves with monumental and tireless difficulty. And the engraving says this: Holy Humility. May all who are guided by the Spirit of God enter together with us into this wise and spiritual assembly, gripping in their spiritual hands the God-engraved stones of wisdom. We have gathered, we have studied, and we have examined the meaning of this valuable engraving. And one said, it means endless ignorance of one's accomplishments. Another says, it is the understanding of oneself as the last of all and the worst sinner of all. Yet another says, the mind's understanding of one's feebleness and powerlessness. Yet another says, in moments of anger it means to hinder one's neighbor and be the first to end an argument. And another says, understanding the grace and mercy of God. Another again says, the sense of a remorseful soul and the renunciation of one's self-will. However, when I had heard all these things and carefully and solemnly contemplated on it, I discovered that from what had been said, I had not been able to understand the holy feeling of that virtue. Then, finally having collected what had dropped from the lips of all those educated and holy fathers as a dog collects the crumbs that fall from the table, I too gave my understanding of it and said, humility is a grace without name in the soul. Its name is heard by those who have been taught it by experience. It is an unmentionable treasure, a name and a grace from God, for it is said, learn it not from an angel, nor from man, and not from a book, but from me, that is, from me abiding in you, from my illumination and working within you, for I am meek and humble of heart, and in mind and in spirit, and your souls will discover rest from conflicts and rest from debates. The figure of this holy vine has one form during the winter of the passions, a different one during the spring of the budding fruit, a still different one during the harvest of all virtues. And all these different forms agree in joy and producing fruit, and so they all have their own marks of the coming fruit. For when the cluster of divine humility starts to blossom inside of us, we immediately start, although with our effort, to detest all worldly honor and praise, and to cast out from ourselves any annoyance and indignation. To the degree that this head of the virtues advances in our soul through spiritual growth, so also we look upon all the good works achieved by us as nothing, or rather as vile, believing that each day we put more and more onto the unrevealed weight of our dissipation. We believe that the generosity of heavenly gifts raining upon us to be beyond what we deserve, and will only serve to exacerbate our punishment. So our thoughts continue undisturbed, resting safely in the coffin of modesty, only listening to the bumps and gribes of the grave robbers, not being threatened by anything they say, because modesty is an impregnable wall. So we have undertaken in a few words to philosophize concerning the budding and the increase of this ever-thriving fruit. But what is the excellent reward of this sacred virtue? You who are close to the Lord must inquire of the Lord himself. It is not possible to measure the quantity of this sacred treasure, and to describe its size is still more inconceivable. Still, with regard to its distinguishing marks, we should attempt to declare the thoughts of our mind. Painful remorse, lamentation purified of all corruption, and divine humility in novices, are as different from one another as yeast and flour from the finished bread. By visible repentance, the soul is shattered and refined to bring it to a certain degree of unity, I will say perhaps a mixing with God, by the agency of the water of sincere grief. Then, with a spark from the fire of the Lord, holy humility turns into bread and is made hard without using the leaven of pride. Therefore, when this divine threefold rope, or indeed divine rainbow, joins into one force and action, it secures its own effects and qualities. And whatsoever you name as a mark of one of them, it is also a sign of another. So I will try to show what I have stated by a short example. The primary and most important characteristic of this superb and grand Trinity is the consent to disgrace with great pleasure, when the soul takes it with hands extended and receives it as something which soothes and cauterizes the illness of the soul and significant vices. The next characteristic is the passing of all anger and meekness at its mollification. The third and highest level is the sincere doubt of one's excellent characteristics and a ceaseless longing to learn. The conclusion of the law and the prophets is Christ for the integrity of every believer, and the conclusion of the corrupt passions is vainglory and haughtiness for each person who does not concern himself with this business. But the ruiner of them, this spiritual deer, humility, watches over him who abides with it, immune to all forms of poison. For where can the venom of hypocrisy appear in a meek soul? Where is the venom of slander? And where will the serpent rest and be disguised? Will it not instead be taken out of the soil of the heart and be slain and killed? In unity with humility, it is not possible that there should be any sight of malice, or of any argument, or even the smell of disobedience, unless faith is the matter of dispute. He who has a bride of humility is before everything else meek, mild, full of remorse, sympathetic, concerned, radiant, pliable, not offensive, alert, not lazy. And why say any more? He is free from passion. For the Lord recalled us in our humility, and delivered us from all our enemies, and our passions and corruptions. A monk that is humble will not toy with the mysteries, but a haughty one will look into the methods of God. The demons glorified one of the most discerning of the brothers, showing themselves visibly to him. But this great sage said to them, "If you stop glorifying me through the thoughts of my heart, I will assume from your exit that I am most excellent. But if you continue glorifying me from your praise, I will guess my uncleanliness. For each proud-hearted man is unclean in the presence of the Lord. And so, either depart from me, and then I will become great, or else glorify me, and through you I will receive more humility." Stricken with confusion, they immediately disappeared from view. Let your soul not be a lake in the stream of life, a lake which is at times full and at other times dry from the fire of praise and glory. Instead, let it be a spring of dispassion, forever springing up in a stream of poverty. Understand, my beloved, that the valleys will become deep in corn and fruits of the Spirit. This valley is a soul that is meek and low among all the mountains. That is, it is replete with toils and virtues, and yet always continues meek and stable. David never said, "I have fasted," or "I have kept the vigil," or "I have stretched out naked on the ground," but "I humbled myself, and quickly the Lord saved me." Repentance lifts up the fallen, lamentation raps at the door of heaven, and divine humility opens it. But I confirm this, and I worship the Trinity in one, and the one in Trinity. All manifest things receive their light from the sun, and all that is accomplished by reason receives its impetus from humility. When there is no light, there is darkness. Where there is a lack of humility, everything we have is rotten. In the entire universe, there is only one spot that has only seen the sun one time, and there is one thought which has many times given birth to a humble nature. There was also one day on which the entire earth rejoiced, and there is one virtue which the demons are unable to mimic. It is one thing to elevate yourself, another to not elevate yourself, and quite another to humble yourself. One person may be forever condemning others, another does not even judge others, but he does not judge himself. A third, although he is blameless, is constantly condemning himself. It is one thing to be humble, another to contend for humility, and yet another to glorify the humble. The first is a characteristic of the perfect, the second to the sincerely obedient, and the third to all believers. The one who has humility inside will not be deceived by his mouth, for what is not in the treasure chest cannot be carried out through this door. A horse, when it is by itself, supposes that it is galloping, but when it is in the company of others, it discovers just how slow it is. It is a mark of the beginning of better health when our mind stops priding itself on its natural gifts. But while that foul odor is present in the nose, it cannot smell the fragrance of myrrh. Holy humility stated, "My beloved will not chastise, nor judge, nor exercise authority, nor flaunt his knowledge, until he has joined himself with me. For when it has joined himself with me, the law is no longer relevant to him." The vile foe uttered praise into the heart of an ascetic who was struggling for holy humility, but through divine impulse he plotted to overcome the trickery of its spirits by a devout ploy. He got up and listed on the wall of his cell the names of the best virtues in order, which are pure love, angel-like humility, simple prayer, holy chastity, and similar such virtues. So when vainglorious thoughts started to laud him, he told them, "May we go and be judged?" Then approaching the wall, he read off the names and told himself, "When you keep all these, then you will understand just how distant you still are from God." We are unable to explain the nature and substance of this sun, humility, but from its characteristics and results, we can describe its inner form. Humility is a heavenly sanctuary to shield us from looking upon our accomplishments. Humility is a depth of self-effacement which no robber can attain. Humility is a mighty tower in the face of the foe. The enemy will not overcome him, nor will the sun, or indeed the thought of transgression, do harm to him. He will cast away his foes from his presence, and will overcome them that despise him. Apart from all the distinctive characteristics given above, the excellent holder of this treasure also has others within his soul, and every one of these characteristics except for one are manifest marks of this treasure. You will understand with surety that you have this holy property within you by a profusion of unmentionable light, by an unspeakable love for prayer, and prior to this being reached, by a heart that is not judgmental of the shortcomings of others. And the forerunner of what has been described is a despising of all vainglory. The one who has come to understand himself has achieved a knowledge of the fear of the Lord, and he who has walked with the help of this fear has come to the gateway of love. Humility is the gateway of the King that welcomes those who come near to it, and I suppose that the Lord was speaking of this gateway when he said, "He will enter and will leave from life without fear, and he will find pasture and green grass in paradise." Everyone who has come to the monastic way of life by any other gate is a robber and thief of his own soul. Those of us who desire to know this must never stop studying this. For if our soul is discerning enough to recognize that our neighbor is superior to us in every way, then divine mercy is close to us. It is not possible for snow to suddenly catch on fire, and it is even harder for humility to abide in an unorthodox person. This is a thing which the devout and faithful accomplish, and then only when they have been cleansed. Most of us refer to ourselves as sinners, and it might be that some really think it, but it is disgrace that proves the heart. The one who is rushing to that calm harbor of a humble nature will never stop to do all he is capable of, and he will push himself forward by words and ideas and afterthoughts and many other ways, by examinations and studies, and by his entire life, by entreaties and supplications, meditations and deliberations, and employing every possible means until with the help of God and through dwelling in humiliations and the most wretched conditions, and by labors, he saves the boat of his soul from the endless storms of the ocean of vainglory. For he who is saved from this sin is easily forgiven the rest of his iniquities, like the tax collector in the gospel. There are some who throughout their entire lives use the evil works formerly committed by them, and for which they have been granted forgiveness, as a motivation for humility, and so push out their meaningless self-respect. There are others who, keeping in mind Christ's passion, look upon themselves as forever in debt. There are others who look upon themselves as worthless of their constant shortcomings. Still others, on account of their ever-present temptations, illnesses, and sins, have put to death their haughtiness. Others, for lack of grace, have seized hold of the mother of graces, humility. There are also those, if they are still around, who, with the hope of receiving gifts from God, to the degree that they acquire them, humble themselves, and so live, reckoning themselves not worthy of such treasure, and every day put it to their debt. Such is humility, such is joy, such is the most excellent prize. When you observe or hear that there is one who in a few years acquired the most superb dispassion, then know that he journeyed by no other path than by this holy shortcut. A divine team is love and humility, for the one lifts up and the other, holding up the exalted, never lets it fall. Remorse is one thing, understanding oneself is another, humility is yet another. Remorse is the consequence of stumbling. He who stumbles is shattered and is present at prayer without bravery, but with honorable persistence, as one who is crushed, holding himself up with the rod of hope and using it to chase away the hound of depression. Knowing oneself is a sure notion of one's spiritual growth, and always remembering one's smallest sins. Humility is the spiritual instruction of Christ, which is spiritually acquired in the closet of the soul by those that are reckoned as deserving it. One cannot explain it in words. The one who states that he fully senses the aroma of such myrrh, yet detects, when lauded, even a slight motion of the heart, or knows the power of the words, let that man make no mistake, he is already in error. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give the honor. I once heard someone state with sincere conviction, because he understood that human nature is not able to dwell in glory without some loss. My acclaim will be from you in the great church, which is the coming age, and before it I am unable to receive it without risking to myself. If the boundary, discipline, and feature of intense pride is to fake such virtues which does not have for the sake of glory, then it must be a mark of the most profound humility to lessen ourselves by feigning that we possess faults which we do not have. It was in this manner that he acted who took into his hands cheese and bread. Similarly, the advocate of purity, who stripped himself and free of passion proceeded through the entire city. Such men have no concern for human rebuke. They have already received invisible strength by means of prayer to encourage everyone. But the one who is concerned about the first will display a deficiency in the latter. When God is ready to listen to our prayer, then there is nothing we can do. It is more honorable to insult men than God. God delights when he observes us racing off to meet with disgrace, so as to shatter, kick, and ruin our empty self-respect. These virtues are the result of us fleeing from the world, born to the highest level, for only the most excellent among us can take ridicule from our own people. Do not be astonished at what has been related, for there is no one who is able to ascend an entire ladder in one step. Through this all we will know that we are God's disciples. Not because the demons submit to us, but because our names are engraved in the heaven of humility. The innate characteristic of the lemon tree is that it raises its branches up when it possesses no fruit, but the more the branches stoop down, the more fruit they produce. Those who possess the mind to comprehend this will know its meaning. Divine humility received from God is the ability to produce fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. The dispassionate receive this to the highest level, the brave to the middle, and all can ascend to the first. The one who has come to understand himself will never be deceived into attempting something which is beyond his abilities, but keeps his feet securely on the blessed road of humility. Birds are afraid of the sight of a hawk, and those who exercise humility are afraid of the sound of debate. Many have achieved salvation without prophecies and divine lights, without marvels and omens, but without humility no one will come to the marriage chamber, for humility is a guard of those gifts, and without her they will lead superficial people to destruction. For those among us who have no desire to humble ourselves, the Lord has determined in his providence that none can look upon his faults quite as well as his neighbor does. So we are forced to be grateful for our recovery not to ourselves, but to our neighbor and to God. The person who has a humble mind will always disregard his own inclinations as being in error, and his petitions to the Lord he examines with undoubting faith to understand and to obey. He does not set his mind on the life of his lords, but puts his concern on God, who used a donkey to instruct Balaam on his responsibility. A laborer of this type, even though he does all things and thinks and speaks by the will of God, still he will not trust himself. Self-respect for those that are humble is just as much a burden as another's decision is for the proud. It appears to me that it is characteristic only of an angel to not privately commit sins. For I heard an angel of the earth say, I know of nothing against myself, yet am not by this made righteous. But he who judges me is the Lord. So we should always condemn and rebuke ourselves so as to throw off involuntary sins through willful disgraces. For if we do not, at our death we will surely be given a harsh punishment. The one who requests less than he deserves from God will surely obtain more than he deserves. This is clearly shown by the tax collector who requested forgiveness but obtained justification, and the thief merely requested to be remembered in his kingdom, but he inherited paradise. It is not possible to observe a fire, small or large, in a natural beast. It is also impossible that anything of a physical nature should be discovered in true humility. So long as we stumble with willful sins, there is no humility in us. It is a mark that there still remains something material within us. The Lord, understanding that the goodness of the soul is modeled on visible deeds, took a towel and gave us an example of how to walk the path of humility. For the soul conforms to its outward deeds. It takes its form and shape from its works. Authority was the reason for the pride of one of the angels, even though it was not the reason it was given to him. The person who is seated on a throne has certain characteristics, and the one who is seated on a heap of manure has yet others. That may be why that excellent saint sat on the heap of manure outside the city, because then, when he had acquired complete humility, he stated with a profound feeling, I detested myself and fled away, and I have reckoned myself dirt and ashes. I discovered that Manasseh sinned like no other has ever sinned, by corrupting the temple of God with idols and polluting all the divine worship. If the entire world had engaged in a fast for him, it would have been no help. However, humility had the strength to correct even what was incorrigible in him. If you had desired a sacrifice, I would have given it, said David to God. But you will not be pleased with whole burnt offerings, which are bodies wasted by fasting. The sacrifice of God, and everyone knows what is next. I sinned against the Lord. Holy humility once cried out to God after it committed adultery and murder, and quickly he heard, the Lord has removed your sin. The honorable fathers established that the path to humility and its foundation is bodily labor, and I would venture to say obedience and truthfulness of heart, for they are innately in opposition to self-respect. If some angels were turned into demons through pride, doubtlessly angels can be fashioned out of demons with humility. Therefore, those who have stumbled may take heart. Let us hurry with all our strength to battle our way to the peak of humility. If this should fail, though, let us at least climb upon her shoulders. But if your labors are not sufficient for this, let us at least not tumble out of her embrace, for I suppose there is no one who, if he falls away, will obtain any eternal gift. The muscles of humility and its characteristics, although not its marks, are poverty, secret retreat from the world, hiding wisdom, simple words, begging alms, concealment of royalty, putting away familiarity, and doing away with chatter. There is nothing which can so humble the soul as a situation of poverty and a beggarly existence. Because we only show ourselves to be philosophers and lovers of God when we have the possibility of being exalted, and instead we run from it irreversibly. If you go to war with a certain passion, take humility with you as a companion, for she will tread upon the asp and the adder, which are sin and despair, and will trample underfoot the dragon and the lion, which are the devil and the serpent of the body. Humility is the heavenly siphon, which can be used to raise the soul to heaven from the depth of sin. There was one who observed in his heart the splendor of humility, and taken with wonder, asked to reveal him the name of her parent. Smiling delightfully and calmly at him, humility answered, "How is it you are in haste to know the name of my parent? He has no name, and I cannot reveal it to you unless you possess God. To him be glory for ever and ever. Amen." The mother of the spring is the depth of the ocean, and the spring of discernment is humility.